Here we are. Welcome to What a Word is Worth. This is a space for creative minds to speak about viable ways to heal the world through writing and other inventive mediums. This is your host, Marianela Medrano. I am the founder of Palabra Training Center, where words are given as medicine. My guest today is a shiny star, my colleague Sandra Hunter. She has written stories galore and is the recipient of the 2018 Lorian Hemingway Short Story Competition, among many other awards. And I am delighted to have you here, Sandra. Welcome.
Thank you, Marianela. It's a delight to be here.
Yes. So we met at a fantastic gathering of women writers at Ghost Ranch in beautiful Santa Fe, the land that was tended and loved by Georgia O'Keeffe. And I remember feeling so taken by the power of your writing and your presence. And I'm curious to know, what was your first encounter with the power of words? And do you believe that there is healing in that power?
Well, the power of words came, as so many writers will tell you, from not being permitted to speak. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of conflict in my family, and we were told to be quiet, but it was always safest to be quiet. And so because I wasn't permitted to speak, I found other ways to use language. So I was one of those peculiar kids who used to talk to themselves on the way to school, and I'd have wild conversations and would imagine other people and speak for them and speak for myself and speak for them. And of course, those conversations never went the way I wanted them to when I got to school. But it was a really amazing world where language could flow without being told I wasn't to speak. So I started, I think, as a lot of writers do, by writing awful poetry and, poetry that I would never look back on. And that continued until I realized I wanted to do more with it. And I felt a really strong connection with writing for characters. So dialogue was immensely important to me, because dialogue was the way that women were just able to reveal identity. In the way that was being repressed in a lot of other areas. So freedom was speech to me, the freedom to express, the freedom to become, the freedom to dimensionalize, the freedom to reach other people was through the voice. And still to me now, voice is identity.
Beautiful. So that the freeing was by creating characters, right? And did you get to a point, though, where it was easier then to enact or actually materialize the conversation with, let's say, people who had power over you?
No.
No?
No, I never did. I suffered because of it. There was a lot of sexism and patriarchalism in England at the time when I was at college. I suffered which completely impacted my undergraduate degree because of that, because I couldn't speak truth to power. And so I felt belittled and made smaller because of it, which was extraordinary, because you go to university to expand, to grow into new worlds. And I did with friends, but with male faculty, it was always a problem. Male, white faculty, there was always a problem. And so that if you didn't conform rigidly to what they wanted, then there would be consequences. So it was after leaving college and going to Kenya for 2 years and working with people that I started to find I was moving into my voice much more easily. And so it became a place where there were no expectations of me. I wasn't in England being looked at as a person of color, as, you know, there were definite patriarchal issues in Kenya, but not issues to do with race. Yeah. And that's when I was able to start becoming more vocal.
It was easier. Yes. Yes. So let's go back to the beginning, to your first, your debut novel, Losing Touch, a novel that unfolds the complexity of identity at many levels. And the story circles around the ebb and flow of family dynamics, right? Tell us about the creation of female characters juxtaposed to the male ones. And I guess the curiosity I have is, if you were to rewrite it, will you change anything?
This is a great question, because very often I go back to short stories, or I used to. I've learned my lesson. I don't do that now. And I'll look at the story and go, I don't believe I wrote that. I would rewrite this so differently. With that book, because it was predicated on my family's move from India to England after independence, I wouldn't change that trajectory. I changed the characters to be Indian. My family on my father's side is Anglo-Indian. My mother is Sri Lankan, Portuguese, and Dutch. So that was changed, and they were given Indian names and an Indian background, and there was you know, all those things that went on with conforming, not conforming to the dominant racial culture. And it was extremely interesting to me how in the family, the women dominated in the kitchen and the men dominated in other areas. And women struggled for power in places where they didn't have power. So they held onto the small amount of power they had, while the men were free to dominate in economic ways, in patriarchal ways, in ways that were very damaging, in fact. So the idea was to try and do that without victimizing, without demonizing, and to show these people as, you know, just normal people, flawed and beautiful and triumphant and graceful and gracious and loving, and yet damaging at the same time, which I think is probably what happens with most children of immigrants, because there's this real, you know, struggle between cultures and struggle for control. And as an immigrant, you have the least control. You come into the dominant culture. If you're lucky, you speak that language. You're struggling to make your way, get a job. You realize your accent doesn't conform. Your choice of, you know, your lexicon doesn't conform. So you are clearly an outsider. And if you look like me, look like you, we are clearly not from the Caucasian culture.
Right, right.
So in that way, I understood how particularly my father struggled to remain in control and become much more disciplinarian, even as he strove to become British. It was a very interesting combination. At the same time, he had spinal muscular atrophy, which, you know, really affected him. And again, we have changes which occur because of disease, which make you more introspective, which make you more open and perhaps a little less judgmental, I think, when you have to suffer like that. So his trajectory is about that change and coming to love his family at a point, sadly, when it's too late.
So there is a lot of biographical here that is, of course, tainted by, not painted or diffused, maybe you will say, by the creative flies that we take.
Yes,
will you say that?
I think that's true. What it gave me the freedom to do by making them Indian, giving them Indian names and Indian customs and all the rest of it, it gave me the freedom to really explore the conflicts that they underwent, the repression they underwent, the kind of racism that was very, very, very apparent, openly apparent in post-World War II England.
Yeah.
So
and then in India as well, right? Like racism, even to these days, is so alive, right?
huge.
Colorism, mostly,
Colorism,
right?
and also culture, because there's a real push towards Hinduism as being the dominant culture. It used to be much more tolerant. Now it's not. But colorism and classism in India has been around for centuries, right?
Yeah,
So that
it's
if you
very
have the
clear.
lighter skin, you've clearly been nurtured indoors, you're from a rich family, you know, you're Kshatriya or Brahmin. But if you have a darker skin, then you've been working outdoors, you do manual work and all the things that are associated with
It's
that.
very clearly demarcated. And, you know, well, when I've been to India, the first time I went there, I was so amazed because I grew up in a culture that wanted to whiten everything. So, you know, the whitening products were quite abundant in my country, but then gradually they kind of disappeared. So when I went to India and I saw that every little corner had an ad of a whitening, bleaching product, and I was, you know, so taken by that, and also at the same time I understood it. I mean, I grew up with that, so I know where it's coming from.
I think it's also very much more exacerbated by the prolific production of films in which the characters are all light-skinned. You know, the main characters are very light. You'll have darker skinned characters, but they take the comedic role, they take the servant role, they take peripheral roles. Very much like, you know, the American film industry until much more recently, right? And definitely in the British film industry. So there is that assumption that is being propagated to all of India and to other countries that watch these programs, that, you know, the lighter the skin, the better, the richer, the nicer the person. So, you know, that's still very much problematic.
It stays very alive. You mentioned the cocktail of races, backgrounds that form your family. When, at the moment of writing the novel, what made you choose the Indian heritage as opposed to the others?
I think it's because the main character's arc is my father's arc, his emotional arc, put it that way, and also the arc of his disease. The rest of it is very much fictionalized. So his family was Anglo-Indian, but his family started with the British occupation of India back in the 19th century and earlier than that, but his family started around then. So it was conscripts coming over from England and being situated in India for long period, you know, years at a time. And it wasn't possible for them to go back home and marry. So they started intermarrying among the Indian women there. And this was encouraged by the British Army because married men were more stable. And secondly, they recognized they would have a buffer race between themselves and the Indians, you know, big mutual distrust and dislike, obviously, as people who are being colonized, you know, they're having their power taken away, their country taken away, and as colonizers, not trusting the people who were indigenous. So this buffer race of Anglo-Indians that grew up as a product between, you know, British and Indian marriages meant that they could put those people, that tribe of people, if you like, into places of communications, so post office and railways and telegraph and police. All of those positions at that time were held by Anglo-Indians. And Anglo-Indians had this really peculiar idea about themselves that they were superior.
Superior, right? Yes, of
despised course. By both the British and the Indians, but they felt they were superior and they very much identified with the British. So you'll get a lot of Anglo-Indians calling England home when they've never been there, would never have gone there, would have been terribly lost if they'd gone there in the first place. So that seemed to me, because my father, really interestingly, called himself Indian. So he wasn't. So he felt very much more Indian, and that was his defense against being rejected as a brown person in England. So he started claiming that side of himself. So it felt much more comfortable to go from that perspective, to have that settled, instead of having to look at the complexity of mixed race heritage, as well as being an immigrant, as well as dealing with a terminal disease. So it felt like those were too many things to handle in one novel. So it just made it more simple to just unionize them.
Makes sense. That makes sense. It's so much, you know, how much colonization has pretty much the same mark all over. Like you're speaking and I'm like, yeah, that was us with Spain. You know, Spain was the motherland.
Yes.
It was something else, but we're not going to go there. But let's go. Let's go to, you said that you started writing awful poetry, which I have a hard time believing that, because when I read Airdrop, your short story is full of poetry. I will say it is a beautiful rendition of poetic justice. Pun clearly intended here. What is the greatest satisfaction that came from writing the story? Such a complex. I felt like as I was reading it that I was really taken through so many narrow passages to make me feel what it is to be oppressed, what it is to be looked down, the gender issues. I mean, there is so much packed in that story. But again, the poetic language, it's just delicious. But what is the greatest satisfaction that comes from it for you as the mother of the piece?
Well, definitely this reaction of yours is extremely extremely wonderful, and it's lovely to hear back from readers when I do readings or if I work in schools. I love all of that. I have to interpolate here that the poetry writing as a child was not the same as the writing as I got older. Things, you know, I learned a lot of different things, read a lot of different books, and was lucky enough to do some creative writing studying in my career. The satisfaction that I get from writing these pieces is lifting a voice that might not normally be heard. And a lot of the stories, definitely the ones in the chapbook and the ones in the collection, are of children. And children are usually set in these socio-political backdrops that are really conflicted. It's war, or they're being oppressed, or something's going on.
Sexualized.
Right? Sexualized, exactly. And trafficked. And but the thing that really lifts the story is the beauty of the child's expressions of loyalty and compassion and love for each other and hope. And to me, that shows the best of humanity. It's from those, because these children are in these circumstances through no fault of their own. They're having to survive, very often without parents or despite parents, spouses or despite spouses, so that their common bonding is something that we want, you know, we're attracted to as readers. We want them to succeed. We want them to survive. We want them to be safe. And sometimes they are and sometimes they're not. And it's not about the sadness when they don't survive. I'm thinking of the story where the girls flee the Moroccan husbands and they get into the boat and they try to get to Spain, right? That's obviously sad. They're not going to survive. But it's the beauty of the friendship and the beauty of the freedom, the freeing of the female voice in those circumstances that emerges as funny and flawed, but compassionate and fiercely loyal. And that just does it for me. I just love that.
Yeah, and the poetics here in the particular story with the politician and the little girl, you know, the power that is in the mischievous, I guess, is one of the things that was captured there. Well, am I reading it right?
Yes, no, absolutely. You have this extraordinary combination, and full disclosure here, this was my response to the Brett Kavanaugh hearings and his election to the Supreme Court. And so I decided to write,
well,
this is where the story came from. This is where the story came from. This entitled white male that's used to having everything his own way, and just, is going to be this male alpha male person, and meets this person who is none of that, and can completely control him. And it's this young girl with this this genetic eye condition where the the pupils have fallen, and she's just very arresting to look at, and she's almost boneless the way she can fold herself away.
Right.
And she creates this chaos in his life that he wasn't expecting. And even though her end is very sad, she has shaken things up forever.
And that's where the power is, right? Like you were saying a moment ago, the ending, right, is not so much what is important, but the wave, the changes that are caused in that passage, right?
Exactly.
Of the person.
Exactly. This disruption.
The disruption,
exactly. Like, this unexpected meeting or unexpected pairing, so that it will change the way that your life has flowed, or that your assumption of yourself is. And definitely with this entitled politician, there's an assumption of privilege that becomes completely disrupted because of this one person.
You're having a lot of fun, though, creating things, I can tell.
Yes, definitely.
Can you share a little bit? Let's say that we have in our audience, people who are just beginning to write, and especially narrative. Can you share some of your, let's say, habits, rituals that lead to using the day-to-day living in such a masterful way? Can you share some of whatever comes to mind?
Sure, and thank you very much for the compliment. I wouldn't say it was masterful, but I would say that being open to any impression or influence, and I'm not, let me explain that in a different way. I love being out in nature. I mean, I get so much from being among trees and walking on the earth, or being next to the ocean. And perambulation is huge. We have John Muir, we have Bruce Chatwin. So many of the great writers walked as they thought about things. And for me, it's not necessarily, I must think about this deep thought. It's just, I'm hiking, I might be singing happy birthday to myself, and then there's this astonishing mushroom sticking out of a tree, or there is, a fawn peeping behind from its mother, or if I'm lucky, or there's a butterfly, or there is just the beautiful variation in green. I mean, there's so many different types of green. Or on the way home, I'll hear something on the radio. And for me, very often, rage is where I start in a story. It's just,
that's your opening, that's your
injustice. The injustice. It will just get me every time. I remember hearing an amazing program on NPR about the tunnels between Palestine and Israel, actually Palestine and Beirut, where they build these tunnels so that they can get supplies, because the Israeli border is closed. That to me was just astonishing. And so that led to the story that came out for 30 Below, was about this little boy who has to go through the tunnel and get supplies for his family. So it's just this this reaction to these places where injustice is so rampant, and it's always around us in, you know, all over the world. Look at what's going on in America right now.
Right.
And all of that is going on all the time. And all you need, if you are, for me, is a small exposure to one story, or to some comment, or something in the paper. I, you know, might have read a headline, say that you saw beautiful things, came from that story in the paper, where somebody is talking about their Lebanon, you know, the bombing that has been going on, and pleading with the photographer, say that you saw beautiful things. And that was just such an arrow to the heart. So it's taking yourself out of what you would do normally, which is we're in the house, or we're going to school or to work. Put yourself somewhere where you can receive a different message, whether it's from the radio, or from a phone, or from reading, or from just being in a beautiful environment, if you're able to get out to the park or to some green place, or put your hands in the dirt, you know, if you can do that.
Yeah, it's you know, what I'm thinking is the element that I'm hearing here the most, that is impacting you and your prolific writing, is that you are curious and open. Is the openness, and also the what Thich Nhat Hanh used to call the interbeing, right? Like always seeing your communion with everything that is around you. So it's that connecting that's so beautiful.
It's active, I think. It's an active connection, and I'm very curious. And I think if you cultivate that curiousness as a writer or a beginning writer, and you leave off that little shoulder editor that sits and says, oh, you can't write that, oh, you shouldn't write that. You know, all of those things can stop you as a writer. If you replace it with curiosity, what's it like to be this other person? You know, what's it like to, what does their day look like? What's it like to be this animal, or this little insect, or this tree? You know, what would the tree say? What would that conversation look like? As foolish or as silly as it might seem, it can open you into so many more dimensions. And if you are writing a story, if your listeners are writing a story and they're stuck, go away from the story.
Yes.
Go away and pick up something that you wouldn't normally do. Paint or draw or take photographs. For me, it's photography. That's always a way in, because by using a different medium, you will always come back to the thing that you're wanting to do, which is writing the story.
That makes so much sense, because also when you come back, there is a freshness, right? And then you're coming charged with whatever experience you were living through.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes so much sense.
One extraordinary set of experiences for me, being new to Portland, has been walking the bridges in Portland. And there's so much there. It's not just these extraordinary structures. I mean, so many beautiful bridges, so many difficult bridges to cross. There's one that's just so packed with traffic, you feel as though you're being buffeted with the cars as you walk across it. But the walking itself, and the changing perspective as you walk and continue, and being aware of the fact that this is bridge, which is such a massive metaphor for, you know, for life and moving from experience to experience. So understanding that whatever you do when you take yourself out of your normal experience is going to open and reveal so many layers in what you're writing.
Yeah, so wonderful to hear you give these important ins into how we stay connected to the writing and the story. And and then the stories unfold right on their own. Because that's a way for us to get out of the way of the story.
And you as a tremendous poet, I know you as a brilliant poet, Marianne. We know very much how difficult it is to sink into that play without paying attention to it. You know, it's always the never looking directly at the object, but looking away. So it's like having some shy creature. And that if you look away from it, it will come to you.
And something that I think is implied in what you're saying is the use of the body the use of our somatic awareness, right? Like how we tune in to places and experiences, and then learning to listen from that and to speaking and writing from that place, from that knowing.
So important and very well put. Thank you, Marianella. I know when I was walking the bridges, I would take the bus. I always wanted to take the bus because then you have this sense of being moved from one place and you're looking at the streets as you're going, you know, because you're not driving, you can do the looking. There's a lot of stopping and starting, there's other people. And so you've got this sense of all of us are moving in this sense towards something else. And then when you get there, you have to walk to the bridge. You know, some of the bridges are quite close, but some of them are not that easy to get to. And so all of it is journey, and all of it is traveling, all of it is revelation. So it's not just being on the bridge, it's everything that leads up to it's a hot day, I'm having to walk on the tarmac. Here's an unexpected bush of roses by the side of the road that's, you know, that's wind pollinated or insect pollinated, but just, it doesn't look like other roses because it's getting a lot of exhaust on it. And then what must it be like to sit on a corner as a person? There's so much homeless, right? What is it like to sit on a corner in your tent and the only breath of air you get is the exhaust from the bus as it turns the corner, sitting there in the hot day. So you're constantly having these openings to transport yourself and change and open and lessen this sense of being aware, because being a writer, it's so hard to get that out of the way.
Right.
But the more you immerse, as you point out, it's the better your opportunity is to immerse into the story.
Absolutely. I hope our listeners are taking notes. Now let's turn to the work you are doing now. You're empowering women through writing and exploring personhood, right? And inner worth. Where are you in the process? You and I spoke a few months ago. Right? Was it months or was it last year?
It was months ago. It was at the beginning of the year.
Okay. Yeah.
So things have moved along, and as they've moved along, I've begun to clarify as I move into the work. It's very much not about what I intend, but about what the clients want. So and the writing is a portal. So in the masterclasses, in one-on-one work, whether I'm working with a corporation, and fortunate enough to be working with the university in the spring of 2023, it will be different. But the writing is not about being a writer. It's about releasing internally held pain, so epigenetic pain, ancestral pain, familial pain. It's about externalizing that and understanding that's not your pain. It doesn't belong to you. You can let that go. And then with that, and it doesn't happen immediately, of course, comes the realization that there is more to this person than just the pain they're carrying. There is so much more dimension to them. There's so much more beauty and strength and rootedness and power, that they carry the ability to create and dimensionalize the world that will impact so many other people. And that's when mentorship comes in, about pairing professional women with these young women just entering the workplace as mentors. And then expanding, you know, young women then get the benefit of that mentor, and they can also pass that experience on to the generation below them and below them, so that we have a continuum of young women feeling so supported, so nourished, so held up, so validated, that they can actually dismiss racism as unnecessary.
Right.
As, you know, this is your story, this is not my story. And this is who I am as a professional, so that gradually it will become less and less important, or it will become less of a centrally oppressive element in the workplace, which can so destroy women. Absolutely. And men as well, but I'm working with women.
You're working with women, and women of color specifically.
No, I've
Okay.
actually expanded it to non-BIPOC women as well, because everybody has been traumatized by racism.
Absolutely.
This artificial
Absolutely.
construct meant to separate people.
Yes, yes.
And so, yes, the conversations will be awkward at first. And we need to move away from white tears, because that's a distraction.
Right.
But if you, as a non-BIPOC woman, are willing to enter the conversation, we as BIPOC women are willing to meet you there.
That is so important. That is so important.
Yeah.
Can you say more about the epigenetic pain that doesn't belong to us?
Yes.
And helping women see that, or human beings, but specifically you're working with women, and I myself work primarily with women, but not exclusively. Can you say more about that?
Yes. So one of the things that happens with women who enter the programs with me or working in classes is not knowing that they have pain that they're carrying. So they are aware of the pain, but they don't know where it comes from. So they consistently get pain that's not induced by trauma. It just sits in the neck, or it sits in the throat, or in the shoulders. And then when they understand this pain may not be yours, it may have been passed on to you from women who have been used to carrying a lot of burden in their shoulders. This may be passed on to you. So those are physiological manifestations, but there's also emotional. Why am I sad? I don't have anything to be sad about. Why am I depressed? Do I have a condition? When some of this comes from way back. This comes back from, if you have, for example, if you have an immigrant family who comes to the country and they are fleeing war, they will have a heightened sense of awareness, right?
Absolutely.
Because they are not, when is the next bomb coming? When is somebody going to come and bang on the door and tear us out of the house?
Right.
That heightened sense of awareness will come with them. They can't just shed it into a country where, one, they don't want to be, and two, there's going to be racism, and three, they don't need to have that heightened sense of alertness.
Yeah.
But that will be there with them, and that will be passed on to their children non-verbally by modeling. So now you have children in a heightened sense of awareness where they don't need to be, which can be really damaging. And without understanding that, and without knowing how to release it, that gets passed on again. So we've got generations of pain being passed on over and over again without people understanding this is not my pain.
Yes, exactly. Right? So important, such an important conversation. In his book, My Grandmother's Hands, Resmaa Menakem calls that dirty pain.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
That pain that comes out in abusive ways, in explosive ways. And as you were saying, it's not a BIPOC thing. It's not even a colonized people thing. It's pain that is disseminated among all of us.
Yes.
Whether we are white, brown, blue, yellow.
Right, exactly. And we pick up this pain, not just from modeling, but when we forget, we forget so much. When we are carried inside our mothers, all we have is sensation.
Yes.
It's like a washing machine in there. So it's not that they can hear what our mothers are saying, right? But there is a sensation. And when the baby is born, there is no language. There is no way of direct communication except through feeling, through eye contact, through touch. So your child will grow with all of that. So the mother may say to you, everything is fine, when the child is looking at the parents and knowing this is not okay. Or they will sense feelings from you. I shouldn't trust people of darker skin because they could do this. None of that has been articulated, but it's being passed on. And that is part of the issue with epigenetic pain, or dirty pain, as Resmaa Menakem calls it. You're absolutely right. And it's also to do with stories, and the women I work with do this, stories that haven't been passed down. So we look back at our ancestors. They may be voiceless, they may be faceless, they're still there, but their stories have been too brutal to tell. They have been silenced. Their stories have been overwritten by white narrative.
Correct.
And unless we release that, we will continue to bear it. So part of the work that we do is releasing the story through writing, through storytelling, through art, through painting, through singing, through whichever way it comes to. So we make a monument to beauty out of pain. And then we can move to the work of mentorship.
That is, yes, a monument to beauty out of pain. Yes, let's mark that in the center of our awareness that that is possible. So how can people access more information about working with you, and what is a good way?
Well, there are two that come to mind immediately. One is my website, which is www.wildwomenleadersofcolor.com. So it's wildwomenleadersofcolor.com. And that's up there, and you can find the different programs. I also work with end-of-life people who want to get a story out into the world, and that's a very short program. There is a program starting on August the 15th, which is called Journey to Joy, and it's coming from pain, releasing that for women who want to pivot out of corporate, out of their career, who want to start their own business but need to release that pain first. And that there's a free masterclass which is at Eventbrite, but if you go to Facebook and you look for Wild Women Leaders of Color, you will get to that page and you'll be able to click on the link, and that will get you the free masterclass. The program itself starts on the 15th, and that will be a 4-month program. So through Facebook, or through my website. But the new program is not yet on the website, so you'd have to go to my Facebook page first to find that information.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing you with us, and of course your work. It's so available on the web and through bookstores. Of course, people can buy your books. Is there a final message that you want to share with the audience? Anything that I didn't ask and you said, why didn't you ask me this? I want to say this.
No, first of all, thank you, Marianella, for inviting me. And I also want to pay tribute to the work that you're doing in your quiet, understated, but extraordinarily powerful way. You are such a voice for women. So thank you for what you do. Women all over America, and I'm sure all over the world, are holding their hearts and saying thank you that Marianella is out there. You're an incredible force. The last thing that I would like to share with your listeners, if anybody is questioning where they are, if they are feeling sad or unfulfilled, or feel there's something else, listen to that voice. Don't dismiss it. Don't feel that you ought to be holding down a job. You ought to be taking care of everyone in your life. As mothers, it's really hard. We have that sense, right? There is space for you too. Women always put themselves at the bottom of the list when it comes to taking care of themselves. If you have that sense that there's something else, believe it. Believe it. Your body doesn't lie. If your body is telling you something, please listen and follow that. Whether you follow Marianella, whether you come and want to chat to me for a discovery session or just chat, or there are people, there are these amazing gurus, Resma Menakem, sign up for his courses. There are so many people that you can reach out to. Listen to that voice that's talking to you and respond, and give yourself a chance to open to the extraordinary beauty that is you as a powerful, wonderful, rooted, inspired woman who will benefit everybody around you. If you take that step, people will notice the difference.
Beautiful. I love that the portal of entry is actually the pain, but it's not the end. It doesn't determine. Thank you so much, Sandra. And thank you all for listening to What a Word is Worth. You can access today's interview at Anchor, YouTube, and other platforms. And if you find this program helpful, please subscribe. Just hit the subscribe button in your podcast app. And also, if you found our program beneficial, just let us know, leave a review. I am with you in love and compassion, always, always, always.